Hi again. John Wesley Bready, page 350 of his book, This Freedom Whence, the last chapter, Freedom Shall Live, and the last section of the last chapter here. In this truly apostolic succession of the Spirit, with its common legacy of creative achievement, lies the inner and hidden source of our democratic freedom. But this freedom, inherited from our forefathers, and under God obtained by them with a great sum of faith, sacrifice, and initiative, this freedom into which we entered freeborn could in no circumstances coexist with hyper-militarized superstates. Neither could the freeborn, whose self-governing institutions are the offspring of a holy faith, compromise with pagan philosophies, whose cardinal doctrine is the deification of aggressive, enslaving might. This on the brink of World War II, by the way. He's saying all of this. While this treatise is, of necessity, more or less biographical, it has been far from the author's purpose to extol individual leaders. The purpose, rather, has been to trace, in some detail, a primal movement in modern history, which has been strangely neglected. The spiritual succession from the Evangelical Revival, like early Christianity, transcended all national boundaries, for though its first impact was on England and America, its influence is extended all over the world. John Wesley too frequently has been envisaged as the founder of a great religious denomination, whereas, in reality, the creation of any independent movement was repugnant to him, and only could he bring himself to accept such a responsibility when the shepherding of his followers, especially in America, became an imperative duty. The far-reaching spiritual awakening the far-reaching spiritual awakening which resulted from his labors can only be understood in like manner with the Reformation as a spirit-directed movement. Never can it be explained by human leadership or organizing genius alone. It was a second and greater Reformation. It was a fresh and mighty manifestation of Pentecostal power. One of the major criticisms leveled against the Evangelical Revival in its early stages was the meager scholastic training of many of its preachers, and for privileged persons at that time to become identified with this movement was to invite social ostracism. Nevertheless, no other influence since apostolic times has so extended the frontiers of true and soulful culture, or indeed has contributed so richly to the advancement of human betterment. This movement, like the primitive church, at first touched only local areas. Then it became regional and national. With the landing of its representatives in America, it became missionary, while later, by the contagion of a holy enthusiasm, the peoples of all lands have felt its power. The early leaders were preeminently ambassadors of Christ, or bearers of good news, who had experienced in their own lives the transforming power of the gospel. And though not indifferent to social and political affairs, they felt the call to preach a gospel which transforms men, rather than to agitate for social reconstruction. Indeed, had Wesley and Whitfield spent their careers as social reformers, they would have lived disillusioned and died heartbroken men. From their efforts, however, emerged the most profound political and social achievements, thus illustrating history's central truth, that the changing of the hearts of men is ever the surest road toward lifting the level of human society. It undoubtedly was this truth which the Right Honorable David Lloyd George, Prime Minister of England, by the way, in the World War I period, what David Lloyd George had in mind when years ago he declared, quote, "I do not know the exact figures of Britain's debt to America, but I am told that it is 1,000 million odd at the present moment, over $1 billion therefore. It is nothing to the debt that America owes us. Right on the balance sheet, debtor, 1,090 millions. Creditor, John Wesley and George Whitfield." End of quote. When John Wesley, the rigid priest, on May 24th, 1738, entered into the spiritual experience of rebirth, he little realized that his conversion would change the whole tone and tenor of history throughout the English-speaking world and beyond. Nevertheless, such proved to be the case. Montesquieu lived in England from 1729 to 1731 And quite blandly he reported that among cultured Englishmen, quote, there was no such thing as religion, unquote. And he goes on, if anyone spoke of it, everyone laughed. End of quote. In the year of Wesley's conversion, that is 1738, Bishop Butley published his Analogy of Religion, and in his preface he complained that, quote, amongst all people of discernment, unquote, it was taken for granted that Christianity was fictitious. It had become, he lamented, quote, a principal subject of mirth and ridicule, end of quote. Despite all the persecution and contempt poured upon its early emissaries, the Evangelical Revival, by bringing vital, practical Christianity to the unchurched multitudes, gradually changed this entire scene. And in the preceding pages of this book, we have striven to reveal something of the manner in which that amazing change was wrought. This movement, which created a spiritual democracy, became not only the chief medium of our freedom, but the saving salt of our social life. For 2 centuries, it has included among its torchbearers and votaries men and women who have given the noblest leadership in every creative walk of life. The rich heritage from this fructifying stream of influence is still with us, but no generation dare lean upon its heritage. It must experience and perpetuate the faith that gave it life. Our own generation, amidst pervading skepticism and materialism, has little appreciated the glorious legacy of spiritual attainment, which, under God, bequeathed it freedom. That is, our generation got its freedom from these sacrifices. But now that this boon is rudely threatened, this is the late 30s, we are beginning to comprehend its soulful character. And as that comprehension becomes more general and more sincere, faith will be revived, God will be honored, and freedom shall live. So ends this Freedom Whence. And if Bready and his fellow evangelicals were feeling threatened before World War II, imagine how they would feel now. The freedoms that we take for granted that were created for us not by our own sacrifices, but by the sacrifices of millions of others, are indeed in jeopardy as never before, in the Western world anyway. I'll put in a link to 3 videos we did on Paul in Athens, where he preached the gospel to them and was mocked, as Montesquieu points out, in England in 1731, just before Wesley is converted. Religion was mocked, and it was a subject of mirth and ridicule. Well, when Paul took the resurrection gospel to Athens, he too was mocked when he mentioned the word resurrection. So we've done 3 videos on that chapter, aimed principally at Jehovah's Witnesses, what Paul did say and did not say. But I think everybody would benefit by seeing how Paul did this. The most magnificent apologetic gospel in all of history, and it's encompassed in 10 verses in Acts 17. 3 videos altogether. I'll put the link to the first one on the screen, plus a link to the playlist for the entire series, This Freedom Whence. See you soon.